You need to get over it. Now." The words snapped through the room like a belt cracking in a quiet church. Samuel Weller blinked once. The office was silent, still, blinds drawn against the late afternoon sun. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and dry carpet. He sat stiffly on the couch, his shoulders square, his hands folded gently in his lap. They were trembling, just slightly. Not from fear, not quite. Across from him, the therapist leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Her blazer didn't wrinkle. Her face didn't soften. She said it again, slower this time. "It's been 50 years, Mr. Weller. 50 years. You need to let go of the drama. You're not the only person who's seen hard things." Samuel didn't look at her. His eyes were on the floor. The carpet was the same shade as the red dust that clung to boots in South Vietnam. "Other people have trauma too," she continued. "You're not special." A long silence followed. Not awkward, heavy. Samuel lifted his gaze just slightly. The light behind the woman cast a faint shadow along the edges of her face. She looked down at her notes, as if the words she had spoken weren't still rippling across the room. In the corner sat a young woman, no more than 24, tucked behind a low table with a notebook on her lap. The intern. Her pen had stopped moving. She wasn't blinking. She looked at Samuel with wide eyes. He turned slightly in her direction, not to plead, just to breathe. But he caught her expression, that mix of pity and disbelief, and it hit him harder than any bullet he'd ever dodged. On the desk behind them, a phone light blinked softly. One missed voicemail, unheard, but not unseen. Samuel's voice just a minute earlier still seemed to hang in the air like a ghost. They were on fire, he had said. Their faces, they were still boys. The therapist hadn't looked up then either. Now, she stood. "We'll end here," she said. "I'll recommend a workbook. Maybe you can write your memories out. That might help you finally move forward." Samuel slowly reached for his cane. He rose, steady but slower than before. He nodded once, not in agreement, just acknowledgement. His voice didn't shake when he spoke. "I'll see myself out." And with that, he turned and walked toward the door, his boots softly brushing against the carpet. The intern's pen finally fell to the notebook. Her hand trembled. Behind her, the therapist was already typing again. But that blinking light on the phone, it hadn't stopped. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. That same morning, Samuel Weller woke before the birds. Not because of an alarm, but because his body knew no other rhythm. It had been that way for over 5 decades, ever since he returned from the jungle where silence was dangerous and stillness sacred. The air in his house was cool, touched faintly with the scent of old cedar and yesterday's coffee. His feet found the floor slowly. He sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, rubbing his knees, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his weight. In the soft glow of dawn, he reached toward the nightstand, brushing his fingers against a framed photo. Laura. Her eyes were kind, even in print. Her smile never faded. The image was taken on their back porch in 1984, summer light glowing on her cheek. A gentle breeze through the open window rustled the curtain beside him, almost like her breath still filled the room. He whispered, "Morning, Laura," and kissed the corner of the frame. The coffee pot sputtered to life as he moved through the kitchen, the burner clicking with that familiar resistance of old appliances. He didn't rush. Each motion had its place. The way he measured the grounds, the pause before the pour. The mug he used had an eagle on it, its colors faded from thousands of washes. Beneath the bird were the words, "All gave some gave all." He took his coffee out to the porch, where the morning chill still clung to the wood. A single chair sat waiting, its cushion worn, the fabric sun-bleached. He fed the birds like he did every morning, scattering seed in practiced arcs. They came immediately, not afraid, just familiar. A fat one with a crooked leg hopped nearer than the others. Samuel called him Sergeant. He always had. Across the porch railing hung the American flag. The edges were frayed, not from neglect, but from time. Samuel adjusted it slightly, letting the fabric fall freely. It made a soft snap in the wind, not loud but proud. As he sipped his coffee, a few morning joggers passed on the sidewalk. One nodded, the other didn't. A younger man in a hoodie glanced up, saw the flag, and muttered, "Man, still with the war stuff?" Samuel heard it. He didn't flinch. He simply took another sip of coffee and let the birds do the talking. Inside, the living room was neat, sparse, clean, but lived in. A dusty bookshelf stood in the corner, filled with books that hadn't moved in years. History, poetry, theology, and a copy of The Things They Carried with his own underlined notes. Above the mantel was a wooden case containing medals, not prominently placed, just present. They weren't displayed for praise, but for memory, for proof. Beside the case, unopened letters from the Department of Veterans Affairs rested in a shallow ceramic bowl. He hadn't had the strength to open the last one. Something about updated benefit reviews, some language about eligibility and reassessment, words that didn't mean what they were supposed to anymore. On the table sat a notebook. Inside were scribbled thoughts from his sessions. Sentences started and never finished. "Last time I saw Matthew. Sometimes the quiet is worse than the screaming. I wish I had stayed with him longer." At the bank, the teller smiled without warmth. "How are we today, Mr. Weller?" she asked in a voice reserved for toddlers and lost tourists. "Fine, thank you. You'll need to write that on the slip." She slid the paper forward as though he couldn't reach it. He took the pen without a word. Behind him, a man cleared his throat loudly. "I just need to deposit one check," he muttered. Samuel turned slightly, gave him a small nod. The man looked away. He left the bank with his receipt folded neatly in his wallet. The sun had climbed now, warming the sidewalk. He stopped to tie his shoe and heard a voice across the street. Someone laughing. "Old guys like that just don't want to let go. Can't take the hint the world moved on." Samuel stood slowly. He didn't respond, but his hand brushed briefly against the medal-shaped keychain in his pocket. The therapy appointment was later that afternoon. He'd dressed carefully. A button-down shirt, brown slacks, the same wool sweater Laura once bought him for Christmas. The collar was slightly frayed, but the warmth still lingered in the fabric. He took the bus, sat by the window, watched the trees pass in silence. At the receptionist's desk, he gave his name. The woman didn't look up. "Weller, have a seat. She'll be out shortly." He sat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The waiting room smelled like lavender and stale mints. A small television played muted news, something about markets, or maybe weather. He waited 13 minutes past the hour. Then the door opened. The therapist didn't greet him. "Come in," she said flatly, already walking back into the room. He followed. As the door clicked closed behind him, Samuel sat down, exhaled, and placed his cane gently against the side of the chair. The therapist adjusted her jacket, sat across from him, legs crossed, clipboard in hand. "So," she said, already scribbling, "where did we leave off?" Samuel looked at the floor, then at her. "I was telling you about the vehicle fire, and about Matthew." She didn't look up. He continued anyway. They were just laughing, moments before. And then, but that's when her words came. That's when she cut him off, and everything began to turn. The room was no longer a place for healing. It had become something colder, sterile, transactional, like a machine for processing emotions it didn't care to understand. Samuel Weller returned each week, quietly hopeful, not because he believed the words would change, but because part of him still believed in duty. And if healing was a duty, then he would show up. The therapist never smiled. She wore precision like armor. Her tone didn't rise or fall. It held the same cadence whether she was asking about his nightmares or commenting on the weather. And when she asked about the jungle, it always came with a sigh, like an obligation she was eager to be done with. "So the fire again," she said one session, flipping her notes. "Do you think maybe you're dramatizing this to feel relevant?" Samuel blinked. I don't Because it's common, Mr. Weller. Trauma narratives, especially for older veterans who've had identity shifts in retirement. He sat straighter. His voice, when it came, was measured. I don't want identity. I want sleep. She raised an eyebrow. Well, that's on you. You're choosing to carry it. Over the next few weeks, it only worsened. Each session, she chipped away, not at the trauma, but at him. You've told me about this Matthew 4 times. Was he even that close to you? There are veterans with amputations who function better than you. You can't be held hostage by ghosts forever. Samuel didn't argue. He just stopped responding. He sat in silence more often. Let her fill the air with interpretations. Let her feel smart. Let her think he didn't notice the condescension in her posture, the way she crossed her arms like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. He was used to surviving hostile environments. He just never expected to find one in a room labeled safe. Behind the scenes, something else stirred. The young intern, her name was Lily, had begun to take notes after each session. Not the required summaries, private ones, observations, words the therapist used, expressions she made, silences that felt wrong. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But she noticed the receptionist pause the first time she overheard, "Get over it." The woman had looked up from her screen, eyes wide, lips pressed together. She hadn't spoken either. Samuel remained polite. Always, "Yes, ma'am," always, "Thank you," even as the bruises landed invisible. One Tuesday, his friend Miles called. They didn't talk often. Too many years, too many ghosts. But sometimes the voice of someone who shared the memory could soothe the ache. "How's the therapy thing going?" Miles asked. Samuel hesitated. "It's not what I hoped." Miles asked more. Samuel didn't offer details, but something in his voice shook loose concern. Miles hung up and called the clinic himself, asked to speak to a director. Was told, all complaints must be submitted in writing. He hung up in silence and began writing. Later that week, Samuel arrived for another session. He had dressed in his Sunday best this time, not for show, for control. If he looked the part of dignity, maybe she would see him as more than a case file. She didn't look up when he entered. "So," she said, "any new dreams? Or are we still stuck in the jungle?" He sat down, gently placing his hat on the cushion beside him. "I dreamed of Matthew again," he said. "Of course you did." She wrote something, then said it. "Have you ever considered that your guilt is less about trauma and more about self-importance?" The air thickened. Samuel's breath slowed. He didn't respond. She kept writing. What Samuel didn't know was that across town, a caseworker for Veterans Affairs had mentioned the therapist's name in passing and noted, with casual approval, that she was likely to receive a new federal counseling contract. "She's ambitious," they said. "Knows how to move the process along. Doesn't let veterans wallow." The dots were starting to connect. Maybe this wasn't just indifference. Maybe it was strategic. Samuel went home that day and sat on the edge of his bed, hat in hand, hands trembling. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a folded paper. Matthew's obituary, yellowing now. It said he was to become a philosophy teacher. It said he loved Rilke. Samuel stared at the final line. He believed in thinking for the sake of healing. He closed his eyes. The jungle came roaring back. Not as a memory, but as a trap. South Vietnam, 1972. The jungle didn't sound like a jungle that day. It sounded like a furnace, a living thing breathing smoke and metal and blood. Samuel ran, his boots slapped mud thick as tar. His uniform clung to his skin, soaked through with sweat, smoke, and someone else's blood. The air reeked of burning fuel and scorched rubber. Somewhere behind him, a voice screamed, but he couldn't turn back. Not yet. The transport had taken the hit seconds before lifting off. One of the new guys had made a joke just as the blast came. Something about chow back at camp. Then came the crack of the explosion, the sky turning white, and now Samuel was hauling Private Niels, 19, maybe 20, across a ditch, toward what little cover remained. He'd already dragged out 2 others. One was still breathing, the other wasn't. And now Niels was gasping. There was blood on his chest, but his eyes were open. "Don't drop me," Niels choked. "I won't," Samuel growled. Almost there. The wrecked vehicle still burned behind them. Flames licked the shattered frame like it was made of paper. Inside, limbs, screaming, silence, then more screaming. And in the center of it all, Matthew. Samuel saw him through the smoke, crawling, one arm limp, his face covered in soot. Their eyes met. Samuel let go of Niels gently behind the trench wall and ran. Matthew didn't call out. He didn't wave. He just looked. Not with panic, but something worse. Acceptance. Samuel reached him, grabbed him under the arms. The metal frame was buckling, the roof ready to collapse. "Don't you quit on me," Samuel hissed. "I'm not," Matthew whispered. "Just promise me something." Samuel didn't answer. He just pulled. They made it 10 feet before the next shell landed. The ground leapt beneath them. Samuel was thrown sideways into the mud, Matthew with him. Debris rained down in hot, wet chunks. Something pierced the side of Samuel's neck, not deep, but enough to bleed. When he sat up, Matthew was staring, blank, still. Samuel reached out, grabbed his hand. It was warm. For a moment it felt alive. Then slowly that warmth began to leave. In the chaos, someone shouted retreat. Someone else screamed they were still missing men. But Samuel didn't move. He sat in the mud, holding Matthew's hand. The dream of a philosophy teacher. The soft voice that had quoted Camus in the barracks. Gone. Buried under heat and noise and dust. And all Samuel could think of was how Matthew had looked 20 minutes earlier, laughing about something Miles had said, eating canned peaches, talking about chalkboards and lecture halls and the smell of libraries. Now that dream lay in ashes, and his hand was cooling. The world didn't move again until someone touched Samuel's shoulder. "Sergeant, we've got to go. Now!" Miles, bloodied, limping, eyes wide. Samuel nodded, but he couldn't speak. He let go. The fingers slipped from his. The jungle swallowed the light. Back in the present, Samuel stood in front of his dresser. The drawer creaked as he opened it. Inside, a clean handkerchief, a small wooden rosary, and a worn slip of folded newspaper. Matthew's obituary. He reached for the chain, the dog tags, blackened at the edges, still smelling faintly of scorched leather. He closed his eyes, and the hand was there again, still, silent, heavy with memory. The next session began like all the others, but the air felt different, heavy in a quieter way, as if the walls themselves had heard too much, and even they had grown tired of it. Samuel entered the room wearing his usual sweater, sleeves rolled neatly to the forearm, cane tapping softly against the laminate floor. He nodded once at the intern, Lily, whose eyes lingered longer than usual as he passed. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. The therapist didn't rise when he entered. She adjusted her jacket, flipped her notepad, and gestured without lifting her gaze. "Let's just pick up where we left off. Jungle. Dreams. Matthew." Samuel eased into the chair, back straight, hands clasped loosely in his lap. He didn't speak. The therapist tapped her pen. "Well?" Samuel glanced around the room. The neutral paint, the framed quote on the wall. Healing is a journey, not a destination. The small recording device on the table in the corner. It blinked. Recording, as always. For clinical quality assurance. He cleared his throat. "You said last week that maybe guilt was just vanity." She didn't flinch. "Yes, and? I think I've been carrying too much silence," he said softly. She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already decided. "Exactly. Finally, we're making progress." Lily's pen didn't move. She was no longer taking notes. She was listening. That evening, Lily sat alone in the break room long after the clinic closed. Her notebook lay open on the table, filled with pages of timestamps and phrases. "You're not special. Get over it." Trauma is an excuse for stalling. She took out her phone, wrote an email, then deleted it. She started again. This time she included names, dates, specific sessions. She mentioned the recording system. She mentioned the Veterans Affairs contract review coming up. She didn't send it yet. Instead, she saved the draft and stared at the screen for a long time. Miles finished his letter the next day. 4 handwritten pages. No formatting. No pretense. Just truth. He didn't just describe Samuel's valor. He described Samuel's silence. How he never once bragged, never sought attention. How he showed up for every funeral, every visit to the nursing home, every folded flag ceremony. He sent it to 12 other veterans from their old unit. Everyone signed it. He addressed it to the local paper and a national advocacy group. At the clinic, whispers had begun. The receptionist, the same woman who once overheard the therapist's dismissal, had now told 2 staff members. One nodded. The other said nothing. That night, the clinic's voicemail inbox filled with 2 messages, one anonymous and one signed by a former client who had left therapy early after a similar experience. 3 days later, Lily pressed send. She included audio files from 2 sessions. She attached her notes. She sent it not only to the clinic director, but also to a reporter she had met once during a campus event, a journalist known for covering veteran healthcare stories. Then she closed her laptop and cried quietly into her hands. The therapist noticed the shift. Clients began canceling. Appointments vanished from her schedule. Her name no longer appeared in the newsletter about the upcoming Veterans Affairs partnership. She asked the receptionist, "Is there a system glitch?" The woman didn't look up. No, just silence. Then the article came out. Dismissed. The Quiet Harm in Veteran Therapy. It included Miles's letter. It included a statement from Lily, anonymous but detailed. It included a quote from a Department of Veterans Affairs representative. "We will be reviewing all provider partnerships for adherence to respectful, trauma-informed care." And finally, it included Samuel's name. Not in bold, not in drama. Just one quiet sentence. He showed up to heal. What he found was harm. The next day, the clinic received a call. The therapist was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The recordings were pulled, the intern was thanked, and offered a job. They didn't call it a hearing. Officially, it was a board review. But for the people gathered in that room, it felt more like a reckoning. The clinic's meeting room had been rearranged. The folding chairs cleared from storage, the stale water pitchers refreshed, and a podium placed near the back wall. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air carried the faint smell of antiseptic and overwashed carpet. Samuel Weller arrived alone. He wore a dark blazer over his usual sweater, his shoes freshly polished, and the same cap folded carefully in his hands. He sat near the back, quiet, observant. When asked if he wanted to speak, he said simply, "No, I've said enough." He didn't need to say more. Others would do it for him. Lily stood at the front. She held no notes, only a printout of the letter she'd written weeks before. Her voice was steady, clear, a little tired, but sure. "In my training, we were taught the term invisible wounds. It was a metaphor I thought I understood, until I watched someone press salt into them week after week and call it therapy." She paused. "I witnessed a man ask for peace and be told to be silent. I saw humility mistaken for weakness, and I realized that it's not the war that wounds a man most. It's being told his pain doesn't matter." The room didn't shift. It leaned forward. Next, a nurse stepped up. She had worked at the clinic for 6 years. "I kept quiet," she said, "until I heard the recording, and then she played it." The room fell still as the voice echoed from the speakers, calm, sharp, cruel. "You're not special. You need to get over it. Other people have trauma too." The recording clicked off. No one moved, not even the therapist, seated off to the side, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes narrowed but silent. She had no defense today. Not anymore. A pause, then a single clap from the back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it spread, One pair of hands, then another, until the room pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm of acknowledgement. Not a standing ovation, a standing witness. The director of the clinic stood next. He looked at Samuel. Not past him, not over him, but into him. "Mr. Weller," he said, voice thick with emotion, "we failed you, not just as a patient, as a man who gave everything, and asked for so little in return." He held up a sealed envelope. "This is a formal apology from our board, and confirmation that the therapist in question has been removed from consideration for any Veterans Affairs partnership, and is under professional review." He stepped closer, handed it directly to Samuel. Samuel rose. Not quickly, but with full intention. He accepted the envelope, placed it inside his blazer, and nodded once. "Thank you," he said. That was all. Then came the young man in uniform. He couldn't have been more than 25. His back was straight. His dress jacket bore a single service ribbon. He stepped forward slowly. His boots thudded softly against the floor. He stopped in front of Samuel, raised his hand, and saluted. Samuel didn't react at first. He stared at the young man's eyes, so steady, so impossibly young. Then he returned the salute, not quickly, not with ceremony, but with the full weight of a lifetime behind it. There were no cheers, no press releases, but the silence that followed was clean, whole. Something had closed, not erased, but witnessed, and in that, healing had a place to begin. The therapist resigned within the week. There was no press conference, no televised apology, just a silent update to the clinic's staff directory and a brief line in a professional bulletin stating that her license had been placed under review. She left the building on a rainy Thursday afternoon, arms full of file boxes and no one to walk her out. She disappeared in the way people often do when truth finally catches up, not in flames, but in silence. The clinic changed after that. A new training policy was introduced for all incoming therapists, one that began not with diagnostic tools, but with testimony. The first lesson wasn't a diagram of the brain, it was a reading of Miles's letter. Every new hire was required to hear it, to hear the names, to understand the cost of silence. A banner was hung in the lobby that read, "Listen first, always." Across town, a quiet ceremony was held at the Community Veterans Center. A dozen folding chairs, a coffee urn, a tray of oatmeal cookies. Samuel Weller was called to the front. They gave him a certificate, small, framed, naming the new peer counseling fellowship in his honor, the Weller Initiative for Trauma Integrity. He didn't want his name on it, but he accepted it, with one hand on his chest and the other gripping the cap he'd held through it all. Afterward, a reporter asked him how it felt. Samuel looked out the window at the flag flapping in the distance and said only, "Like somebody finally turned the radio down in my head." The reporter didn't understand, but a man standing behind her, a veteran with a service dog and scars along his scalp, nodded. He understood. That evening, Samuel returned home just before sunset. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender. The birds were waiting by the feeder, chirping like nothing had changed. He set the cap gently on the porch table and pulled out a seedling from a small clay pot. He dug a shallow hole beside the porch steps, the same place Laura used to grow her favorite peonies. He placed the seedling in the dirt, pressed soil over it with care. A small wooden post marked the spot. Etched in the grain, a single word, hope. He sat back in the porch chair, arms crossed loosely, the wind brushing against his skin like a familiar hand. Beside him lay a letter, unopened. It was addressed from Nebraska, from a woman whose last name he recognized, Matthew's daughter. He didn't open it, not yet, but he smiled. A long, steady breath filled his lungs. No tremble this time, just calm. He looked up at the sky, a sky that once meant gunfire and smoke. Now it meant evening. He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.